Welcome to An Incomplete History.
I'm Hillary,
And I'm Jeff.
and we're your hosts for this weekly history podcast.
So I received a couple of emails after our first video, kind of how to adopt kind of best practices approach to the software you use and the way you create content, moving into kind of this online format for education. And all of these ideas that I put out here, these are applicable both to educators and to students, as well as if you're neither of those two things. And I just wanted to post this quick video to kind of go over some key ideas that I mentioned briefly in the first one and that people had asked for clarification about. So the first thing I want to talk about is free and open source and what that is and why I think it's so important, especially for educators and for our students. So free and open source, and I've opened up Wikipedia here, and it's funny, educators, we have a complicated relationship with Wikipedia. We use it, but we often don't like it when students use it. And I think the best way you can do that is to kind of engage your students in learning how to use it correctly. In fact, in some of my classes, I do a project where they actually engage in editing Wikipedia articles. There's a whole curriculum that the Wikipedia organization puts out that shows how to do it. And it really kind of shows them the production of knowledge and how that happens and how all of this stuff gets on the internet. But that's another point and perhaps material for another how-to video. But for this one that I'm talking about today, free and open source, you'll see it kind of abbreviated as FOSS or FOSS or free and open source. What it means is this: it's open source software that anybody can get to the code. You can't get sued for it. You can kind of modify it as you would like, do what you want with it, and then redistribute it. And it's very antithetical to the corporate model of software that we have coming out of companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google. Now, Google does have some open source stuff they use and some stuff that they put out that's partially open source. Chromium, Chrome, the browser, there's this other browser called Chromium, and it's kind of a complicated thing, but free and open source means that people can adapt it and modify it and make it do what they want it to do. They don't have to wait for a corporation to decide it's profitable to change something. And the great thing about free and open source as an educator and as a student is, first of all, it's free. So it doesn't cost you money. Now, most places that create free and open source software have a place for you to donate money. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I'll show you for Firefox and for two of the other things we're going to talk about later in part 2 or part 3 of this series, LibreOffice and Joplin. We're going to talk a little bit about places you can give money if you really want to support it. They also value contribution of time, right? And as educators, particularly if you're coming from the humanities or history or something, you may be able to volunteer your time helping to kind of compile how-to guides, edit user manuals, things like that. But first of all, it's free. Second, it's constantly being updated. People are always kind of tweaking it, getting out bugs. So bugs get ironed out very quickly. It is generally devoid of malicious code, right? You just can't go anywhere and find FOSS software and download it, because a lot of times you'll have software that says it's FOSS and it actually installs malicious code. So you need to make sure you're going to somewhere reputable. That's one reason I've put this series together, is to show you what I think the best, most reputable tools are. So you've got free and open source software. And what that builds to is this, and they've got this great thing, the 4 essential freedoms. You can look here, the freedom program, run the program as you wish for any purpose. You can see it up here. The freedom to study how the program works and change it. The freedom to redistribute copies so you can help others, and the freedom to distribute copies of your modified version to others, right? And this is kind of the core philosophy of free and open source software. And this Wikipedia article is actually really well done. It's people who contributed it over time. It's got some great information here if you really want to get into the history of it and what it means. And in fact, even to lawsuits, right? There's the series of lawsuits that happen and what those mean. So free and open source software leads us into the next thing, which is you controlling the things you create. And I know that's a little antithetical, right? Because free and open source software kind of goes along with the idea of Creative Commons, right? The idea is once you create something, if you're using that license, it's just free for anybody to do what they want with. And some things you create, you might want to be out there under Creative Commons license or as free and open source software. But a lot of things we do in academia, a lot of things we do as educators, we don't want that to happen, at least initially, because we put a lot of time and effort in creating things like lectures and researching articles and researching monographs and all these things. And we don't just want all that out there, at least out from under our control. And the problem is if you use something like Microsoft Office or Microsoft's OneDrive or Google's Documents or Google Drive or Apple's iCloud or Apple's, document creation software, you are relinquishing some control of that product, at least to a certain extent. And one of my goals in this series to get you to do is to kind of understand what can you do to mitigate that? How can you prevent that intellectual, product that you've created being put out and dispersed in the broader world without you having any control over it? And one way you can do that is you can focus on privacy and security in the software that you use. So you've got free and open source, but then we're also looking for software that has increased privacy functions and increased security functions. So where I want to start with is the browser you use. And I kind of talked about this in the first video. I might make this video 1B or something. I don't know, because I'm just basically expanding on those ideas. Firefox is the one I use right now. I think it's the most secure. Well, it balances security with usability and compatibility across a broad host of platforms. The reality for educators in an online format that most of us will be doing at least for the fall of 2020, if not beyond that, is we do have to access university resources and sometimes some external publisher sources. And sometimes those aren't compatible with more secure browsers. So what you want to do is pick the browser that's the most compatible with the most security. So Firefox is put out by the Mozilla Corporation, and you can kind of read about Mozilla here, and they have this whole thing about how they are designed to protect your privacy, and they talk about, they block trackers automatically and all this stuff, and that's a good first step. They've also got like data breach warnings and a built-in password protector, which are great, a secure way to send files. I think they are the best compromise in all of this. Now, there are more secure alternatives you can go to, but you run into compatibility issues. So Firefox, Mozilla.org, that's where you go. You can get Firefox, and it's got the browsers listed there, and it kind of tells you a lot about all of these things. It also has a browser for enterprise, and this is where they make some money. But you can also go here, and this is the nonprofit Mozilla Foundation, and you can kind of read all about it here, and they even give you an opportunity to get involved by donating or getting involved in other ways. So you've got that. You've got your Firefox browser, and I just wanted to show you the security settings you can do in here that are pretty easy to get to and robust. If you just click here and go to options right there, it's going to pull this screen up for you, and then you can go to privacy and security, and you can really kind of manage your security. Standard is pretty good. I usually run with strict. That's just me. You can also do custom, which kind of mix and match. You can also whitelist certain sites so they don't have to flow through this. So say you have a university learning management system that your institution uses, and it's just not playing well with the privacy blocking set on strict. You could kind of come in and tell it can actually bypass that guideline. But that's a good first step. And there are other things they have here with security. You can manage your cookie and data. You can manage passwords. Do you want those to be saved? Do you want those to be purged? You want addresses to be saved, or you do want to keep them? Do you want to keep a history? Also, what do you want to show on your address bar? You can just tell it not to give you any of this, right? Permissions, you can really manage the permissions as far as like your microphone, your webcam, your location. A lot of options here, and that's important, right? So you've got kind of privacy there, and the partner program I would go along with it is Thunderbird. And Thunderbird, I talked about before, is this email client. It's integrated with calendars and task list, and there's a lot of extensions you can add to it. And what Thunderbird does is for email is what the Firefox browser does for your general browsing experience. And it integrates really well with virtually every email type there is out there. The only thing is there's a little problem with some former Exchange accounts that use the login.microsoft.com to get into. Sometimes those cannot connect correctly. So be a little wary of that. And Thunderbird, just really quickly, I can open it up here and you can see my folders, and I have it kind of divided by institution and by kind of general email account. And it really is quite handy here. You can go to your task, you can go to your calendars, you can go back to your mail. It's a very functional email client. I love it, and it works across platforms, right? Another key tenet, along with free and open source and emphasizing privacy and security, is this idea of cross-platform compatibility. So the idea is this, is like, say you have a MacBook that you use, maybe you take to lecture, that's what you lecture off of. Say you have a desktop PC in your office, and say at home you like to tinker with Linux. You have a Linux box at home, one of the flavors of Linux. Well, ideally, these core applications you use constantly, your email client, your web browser, hopefully they're the same or very similar, so you don't have to kind of learn a whole new way of operating with these things across platforms. So Firefox, available across all those platforms, including your phones, right? Including Android and iOS devices. Thunderbird is cross-compatible, not on your phones, however. That's the one thing about it. You can't use Thunderbird on your phones. However, you can use it across all three major platforms, Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. That's another consideration in all of this. So I do want to talk really briefly before I end this part of this series about something called Seamonkey, and it's from Mozilla. And Seamonkey is everything all in one. And I've messed with it a little bit, and I think this, if I get a little breather this summer, I think I might go in and mess around with it a little bit more just to see what's going on with it. It's a hybrid thing, right? It is kind of designed to be a little bit of everything. And I wanted to show you, this is theoretically what the browser will look like in Seamonkey. And you notice it bears a striking resemblance to Thunderbird. So if I open Thunderbird back up, it's a very similar kind of look and feel to it. It's not identical, but it's definitely in the same family. Now you can customize this. If it's like Firefox, if it's like Thunderbird, you're going to be able to really customize how this appears. But that's the browser, and we can also look at mail. This is the mail composition thing. I mean, it's some people would say it's kind of a dated interface, but it's something maybe useful to look at. So that's it for this part of the series. The next part, I'm going to kind of do what I promised to do for the second video initially, which I'm going to talk about a couple of key applications, including LibreOffice, Joplin, and Ocular. And there are three things that will cover, I would say, 95% of what you're going to be doing as far as creating material for your courses. And then the episode after that, I'm actually going to talk about what you use to actually create online material to use, whether that's recording your screen, whether that's recording a lecture, editing video out of those recordings, any of those things. That'll be in 2 episodes. Next episode, LibreOffice, Joplin, and Ocular.